The topic we're going to talk about today is really the last of the broader topic about sanctity of life issues, life and death issues in medicine, including brain death, abortion, questions about the treatment of severely disabled infants that we had, the distinctions that are drawn between killing and letting die, and today we're talking about voluntary euthanasia and physician-assisted dying. So that will bring that section of the course to a close, and if we have some time I'll ask for questions and comments about where we've got to so far. So to conclude that general area of discussion, I want to talk about voluntary euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. You might remember that we talked in the discussion about brain death and persistent vegetative state, we talked about the case of Tony Bland, the young man who was caught in that tragedy at the football's tragedy in England, and who was in a persistent vegetative state, and his case went through all of the levels of appeal in England, and all of the judges said that it was acceptable to withdraw his feeding tube because the doctors had said he would never recover consciousness. And that was done and he died. But in discussing this, the question was raised, how would this be different from giving him a lethal injection? And one of the judges of the House of Lords, as at that time it was called, the highest court in England, actually raised this question very directly in a way that said, well, ethically speaking, there doesn't really seem to be any difference between what we, the court, are saying may be done and between what would be giving him a lethal injection. But the judge said, it is undoubtedly the law. So really what the judge is saying is, we can only, as a court, follow the law, follow the precedents that exist, and so we can authorise the withdrawal of the feeding tube. We could not authorise the giving of a lethal injection because that would require an act of Parliament to change the law in that respect. Now the British courts are somewhat different in their jurisprudential tradition from American courts, which are perhaps more ready, against the background of the broadly framed Constitution and Bill of Rights in the United States, they're more ready to say that there are rights for which there is no legal precedent, as we saw in the case of Roe versus Wade. But the British courts are less inclined to do that. They have a sharper idea of the distinction between what is for Parliament to do and what is for the courts to do. So they're not proposing to change the law here, they're just saying it's difficult to find a moral basis for this distinction. And that does lead many people to think about, well, should we change the law? So the question we ought to ask in discussing that is, well, what is it that normally makes it wrong to kill another person? And then to ask whether this also applies to the cases that we're about to consider. So this is a question that people don't very often ask outside of courses in ethics, perhaps. It's something that you just take for granted, that it is normally wrong to kill another person. But it's exactly the kind of question that we want to ask. Why is that wrong? So here are some possible reasons, very obvious reasons, perhaps, but most people want to go on living. And if you kill them, you deprive them of something that they want, something that is very central. You could say they probably want that more than they want anything, at least in the long term. So you're going against one of their major wants or preferences. Secondly, killing deprives them of the rest of their life. And normally the rest of their life is going to have positive experiences. The classical utilitarians would have said you deprive them of happiness, or of the surplus of happiness over misery that they would have had if they had continued to live. You might think that there are more things that are good that are valuable to people than just happiness, but whatever it is that they could have had that's positive in their life, killing them will deprive them of it. And thirdly, not directly about the victim perhaps, but very important all the same in what we often feel about the tragedy when somebody is killed, is that will cause grief to those who love that person, and perhaps to those who wanted to have that person's company and companionship for many years to come. So those are at least three important reasons why it's normally wrong to kill someone. And I'm not saying they're the only ones, you can think about others. But if we look at those three, then we do have to ask, what if none of the above apply? What if you have a case of killing where none of those three things are true? And if we look at the cases that we're about to consider, cases where people request voluntary euthanasia or request the assistance of a physician in dying, then typically none of these things apply, or at least the first two don't apply and the third maybe applies to a much lesser degree. So firstly, if people make a considered request to a physician for assistance in dying, then it seems pretty obvious that they don't want to go on living. You wouldn't make that request if you did want to go on living. And as we'll see, many of the legal provisions where voluntary euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide is permitted make sure that that is not a kind of momentary aberration, that just on a whim they ask a physician to kill them, but that actually they have thought carefully about that and thought about it over some period of time. So in the cases we're talking about, it does seem clear that the person in question does not want to go on living. Secondly, does it deprive them of positive experiences in future? Well, typically in these cases, people think that their future is not going to be positive, which doesn't mean that it will have no positive experiences in it, but it does mean that they think, on balance, it's not going to be positive. On balance, they think it will contain more suffering or misery than it will contain joy or happiness. Or again, whatever you think of as positive experiences. Typically, people think their quality of life has already sunk to a level that is not positive and it's not going to get any better. So I think they would say, if you said to them, well, what about the positive experiences that euthanasia is going to deprive you of? They would say, what positive experiences? It's going to deprive me of a relatively short period, perhaps, although that's not always the case, but it's going to deprive me or spare me a lot of misery. So that doesn't seem to apply. The third case, well, it may be that the family are not always ready for the loss of the person they love, but again, in most cases, not all, this would at best be a temporary postponement of grief, because in most cases the person is going to die fairly soon anyway, weeks or months. So in that case, they're going to have to face up to the grief, and you might think that the other two factors might outweigh it, if indeed. And of course, there would be some cases where people are not going to experience grief, where they're fully prepared for the death of the person they love, and they understand that that's what the person wants, and they don't want them to suffer more than they otherwise would.